answer. First of all, I'd like to say thanks very much for inviting me along today. I'm here in my role as the horticulture manager for the HTA, which of course represents largely the ornamental growers and retailers and everything associated with that across the UK. So when I was asked to sort of find answers to these various questions, I obviously have my own ideas, and then I thought, you know, get a grip. I'm not here for me, I'm here for the growers that I represent. So for the first time in my life, I have a sheaf of paper with me. I've never talked with notes before, but because this time I feel I really need to give not my ideas, but those of the UK growers. So I'm afraid I'm going to keep referring to my notes, which is a horrible thing. So I might be rather more hesitant than normal. But so my question is, or that I put to a group of some of our growers, what are the challenges that you, as growers of ornamentals, feel that bacterial diseases are posing? And it was really clear, there is absolutely no doubt that for the commercial grower, be they a supplier into the amenity sector, into the garden centres and other retailers, or direct to public sales, it is felt very strongly that bacterial pathogens pose a serious problem. It seems particularly interestingly to those growers of herbaceous perennials, and they feel very much that that's become more of an issue to them in recent years. So what are the challenges they're facing on a practical level? Well, it's often because the solutions they have available to them when there's a bacterial infection problem is that they are cultural. And of course, that can be really difficult to achieve cultural changes when you're growing a plant, often not in its natural environment, under glass, under certain conditions, not necessarily the same as the UK climate outside. And so, for instance, when it comes to things like irrigation controls under protection, it can be quite difficult. But then, of course, as soon as you move out into field-grown crops, the whole thing gets even harder. And that was a prevalent comment, really. And sadly, it would seem that over the years, many of our growers have actually abandoned production of a good number of species or varieties of commonly grown plants. And one grower I talked to said that in the past, he had grown literally tens of thousands of hedera every year. He no longer grows them at all. And that apparently was all down to a bacterial infection problem. Another major grower of herbaceous plants reports that they had to completely drop a few lines as a result of increasing problems with bacterial infections. And some of the plants that he mentioned were Sedum Purple Emperor, Lobelia Habston Purple, Lobelia Compton Pink, Lobelia Sparkling Ruby, Campanula Cerastro, to name but a few. And these really are all gorgeous plants. So if you don't know them, I would strongly recommend having a little Google after the talk and seeing just what you're missing out on. There are also major doubts moving forwards over some of the Veronica and the Gazania crops that are being grown, because again, I gather that it seems that bacterial infections are increasing problems in those fields as well. All of these represent potentially significant losses, not just to what the growers can grow, but what you and I can enjoy when we go about our daily lives in our own back gardens, in parks, in public gardens, or just when we're out on the high street. And of course, for the grower, it's also a potential loss of revenue. But we moved, of course, away from herbaceous perennials into some of the woody plants as well. And Cotoneaster and other fire blight susceptible plants, it would seem, are now being grown in considerably smaller quantities than they were before. And the same is being said for prunus species as well. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, again, as you go about your daily life, Prunus laurocerasus has always been a key line for the UK horticulture industry. It's used in many development schemes. It seems to always be prevalent in just about every car park I've ever parked in. But in recent years, it's seen a huge increase in popularity in the retail sector as more and more customers are wanting larger shrubs to put into their gardens and into their plantings. And bacterial shot hole in the form of Pseudomonas here is a constant challenge, it would seem, for some of our growers, because it's going to dramatically affect the look of the plant, and with that it's going to affect its saleability and of course the price they can get for it. And because there are very few conventional chemical products available for the treatment of shot hole, they're relying heavily on biological stimulants to boost disease resistance as much as possible. But interestingly, some of the other people I spoke to have said that bacterial shot hole of laurel, of course, is something they regard really only as a cosmetic problem. So I guess it depends which part you're sort of selling your plants into. But because the threat of xanthomonas is so great, they have noticed that every sign of shot hole on a plant creates a huge fear in people buying plants. And so they again feel that any managing of the bacterial shot hole problem is a priority to them as well. It seems that they've come up with a really rather depressing way of getting around this. And it now, rather than growing prunus, which of course is very happy in the UK climate, out in a field somewhere, they're often growing them under polythene, so in polytunnels, which is completely mad because it's an expensive way of growing this commodity, which doesn't need it, but they're doing it because it seems to reduce the risk of any shot hole infection. And that space, of course, could so easily be used to provide cover for another crop, which really does need the extra warmth that polythene will provide. And instead, it's probably having to have other forms of heat pumped into it. Many nurseries, it seems, have also been experimenting with a range of plant, and don't report them for this, a range of plant protection and feed products in an effort to get bacterial infections under control. It's labor intensive and, of course, sometimes totally unnecessary, but they feel with the threat of various bacterial diseases, then again, they have no option and they have to take whatever preemptive methods they have to hand. Fire blight, needless to say, is still very much with us. And really, some nurseries, again, are saying that it has seriously reduced the range of fire blight hosts that they grow and also the quantity of those plants. They also tend to try and hold fire blight hosts on site for as short a period of time as possible. The logic being that then, of course, it's less likely that that infection will arrive, or that if it is already there, that it will be spread onto other plants. They're even avoiding trimming their crataegus completely, I gather. And some nurseries have reported that they will grow potential fire blight hosts scattered on satellite sites that they own in order, again, to minimize the risk of huge losses were the infection to occur. Now, that's great for some of the bigger guys, but of course, some of the smaller specialist nurseries who grow some of the most delightful plants we have on offer aren't in a position to do that because they simply don't have satellite nurseries. So I then asked my growers what their future concerns were about bacterial and other plant diseases. Well, first of all, there are concerns that some of the changes in production techniques, such as the push towards using peat-free growing media, and as we all know, a plant under stress is a plant that tends to be more susceptible to pest and disease attack. So there's the obvious conclusion being drawn that for those plants where a peat-free growing medium really doesn't suit them well, are they going to find themselves more prone to bacterial and, of course, other pests and diseases? Bacterial diseases, of course, right now, and I've managed to get quite a way into this without mentioning it, are a hot topic because of Xylella. And looking at this as an example, again, there are really big concerns that if one single pathogen like Xylella fastidiosa can have such a massive and diverse host range, is this something that we're going to start seeing with other new bacterial infections as they come in? And there's also concern that, of course, those existing bacterial problems that we have may start to increase their host range. But then, assuming that you can get as far as growing the plants you want to grow, but they are susceptible to infection, we move on to the controls. And the constant reduction in availability of both curative and protective chemical products is costing my side of the industry really hard. It really, really is. And it could again mean that some crops are going to disappear from the market entirely, simply because bacterial infections aren't, it would seem, something at the moment which can be dealt with using biological controls. And that sort of seems to be the way we're going. The few crop protection products that the growers do have, of course, When they do want to prevent or treat bacterial pathogens, most of them have been withdrawn, as you know, over the last 10 years. And those remaining often give really limited and often rather poor and uneconomic control. Their only viable option, it seems then, is to drop that variety, source it from clean stock material, and again, very costly and very difficult to manage, particularly when you don't know when the problem is going to hit. So without adequate control methods available, there is a real fear that we're going to lose even more plants from production. And as I said at the beginning, you and I are going to notice that, not just the people that grow them. Added to that, there's now a really serious concern about the UK's ability to carry out the necessary research and development into bacterial diseases of niche crops. Now, lovely as potatoes are, lovely as veg are, lovely as all those fruits that other people grow are, and of course, I'm including in that things like cereal crops. Unfortunately, if you're a grower of an ornamental crop, you tend to be fairly niche. And on the scale of things, we're small. And some of the things that my growers grow are very small, very niche crops. They still have the problems. And it's a real plea from me on their behalf to make sure that our side of the industry is not ignored. So what I want to know then is, what do we as ornamental growers feel should be being done by you? And where do we feel that the knowledge is lacking? Well, very sadly, it was some pretty fundamental stuff. Some of the things I've had comments on include lack of knowledge as to how bacteria spread within and between plants and how they overwinter, lack of knowledge as to how they spread or not in recycled water, very few chemical control options, and of course, difficulties in detection at low levels of infection. We're in need of earlier identification and warning systems. We're in need of more information on relative susceptibility, and of course, on novel controls, plant breeding, and trade restrictions. It's also been suggested that there should be some research into the use of sterilant products for the crops themselves, not just for tools and other equipment, particularly at the propagation stage, because very often it seems that bacterial issues will begin at this part of the production system. Currently, many people have said that identifying the type of bacterium that's involved really isn't overly important to them at the moment, particularly the herbaceous stock growers, because as they've said, and this is a very sad comment, they have very little to treat them with anyway. And as I said, if we did have the few chemicals that are left, a very broad spectrum, so the treatment is or was the same regardless of the bacterial infection involved. However, with the hope that there may be future biological treatments available, these we would assume would be more targeted toward different types of bacteria, and then knowing exactly what was involved would become more relevant. Now, there's no doubt that the scientific research that's done is potentially really beneficial to all and to everyone in the industry. But once again, I can't overstress the need not to forget the ornamental sector. We may not eat it, we may not depend on it physically to survive, but we all love it. We're a nation of gardeners, and even if you don't like gardening and you love concrete, don't tell me that your heart doesn't sing when you go out and you do your shopping, or you go and drive off to visit a friend, or you go for a walk and you see greenery around you. Most of that has originated at some stage from a grower and a plant that they produced for you to enjoy. You can't eat it, but you can love it. So, okay, you've done some really useful research, and I hope you will do some more. But there's no doubt about it that it's then all down to the communication. And there's no doubt that it's useful and that the trials that are carried out subsequently are also great. But unless that information is then translated into a useful, digestible form and it's disseminated properly throughout the industry, as far as I'm concerned, and I say this with great respect, I come from a family of rampant academics who all went off and became wonderfully good at their niche types of academic work. I'm the only one that strayed very seriously off the path. So I respect hugely research work. But as far as I'm concerned, and in my context as the HTA Hort Manager, if it's not got a useful application and you don't tell people about it, I don't know why you bother. Harsh, rude, and you can strike me off now if you want and silence me, but I say that from the heart. Our growers really need to be made aware of the potential threats that are not yet commercially important too, to help them in the decision-making processes in terms of what they grow and where they source it from. In the past, it would seem that some of the problems, okay, not bacterial, but things like ash dieback and come to that fire blight, but often become quite widespread before growers had been well enough informed to take the necessary action. As I've said, if they know what to look out for and where it might come from before it has an impact, then it really would help them to make the right decisions sooner. So what would be the best way of transmitting this information once you have it? Well, the answer was just about everything was mentioned except carrier pigeons. Multi-channel was one of the favorite comments here. We're asking for email updates, we're asking for information on websites, for webinars, for talks, for presentation at grower-based events. I mean, even just the HTA in its own right, we have regular, in normal times, events for our grower members and often for a wider audience as well. And that's just the sort of place it would be great to pass on all this information. Booklets, talks. Some of you may even remember those fantastic little leaflets that ADAS used to produce with images, with basic information, more complex information, everything about the life cycle, everything about control, resistant varieties. I still have a little stash of them on my bookcase. They were wonderful. And they're the sort of thing which people love. Not everything needs to be internet-based. So once the research has progressed from the lab onto nursery trials, please, please get it out there, and get it out there in a form that our growers can easily take on board. They are incredibly together, intelligent people, but their forte is growing absolutely fantastic quality UK produced plants. They are not scientists, or most of them aren't. So please limit the scientific jargon, make it useful, make it applied, and then we'll love you forever. There you go. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa.